Snowflake, it's a small town. It's kind of secluded from the rest of the world, and it's just a good place to live.
Snowflake is a wonderful small town. It's the place where I was born, where I've been raised and raised my family.
I've grown up in Snowflake my whole life with family and friends all around.
Snowflake is a wonderful place to grow up, to feel close to your neighbors, to your family, to your friends.
I feel surrounded by neighbors and friends. I'm realistic enough to know that bad things happen here sometimes, but I feel safe here.
That's why I chose to come back here with my family after spending some time away at college, because I felt like our kids need every chance they can get to be successful in life and to be raised with good work ethic and good morals. And I feel like that this is a great place to teach those family values and pass on the things that I've been taught.
I love Snowflake. I love the people here. My vision of the early days and my family relationships to the early days makes it even more valuable, of course. It's always been a very warm, loving community and full of a lot of oneness, which is unusual in this day and age. And so I appreciate Snowflake.
A lot of people that have moved here feel like they were drawn to this area and they don't really know why, but when they come here, they see why. So I do feel like Snowflake, Arizona is sacred ground.
The town of Snowflake, Arizona was founded on the backs of people whose names you know as well as your own. You may even share them. Flake, Hunt, Palmer, Willis, Rensher, and Smith. They were practical people, good people. They expected the best of each other and of their children. If something broke, they fixed it. If something burned down, they rebuilt it. If someone was sick, they blessed them and tended to them. And if anyone needed something, anything, food, work, land, they gave it to them, often without fanfare or an expected return. These may be your grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents. They came to this wilderness in faith, not knowing the outcome, but trusting in God that the outcome would be according to His will. They came because they believed in a cause. They came because they believed in the future, and they believed they were creating a legacy for their posterity. What is that legacy, and who is their posterity? To begin a search for the origins of Snowflake, one need not look much further than the town's namesake. The story is told how after the town had been started, Erastus Snow, an apostle of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, asked William Flake about the name of the town, then jokingly suggested they use both their names in a serendipitous combination. The name was met with great approval, and so thus was the town of Snowflake christened. The story and legacy of Snowflake is represented by embedded in and dependent upon one man, William Jordan Flake. His story is the fulcrum point on which the past and the present are balanced. To find Snowflake, we have to seek out the story of William. If anything symbolizes William's life, it would be the road. The road that led him and his parents from the Carolinas to Mississippi, to Nauvoo, and to the Salt Lake Valley. Then to California, to Beaver City, Utah, and ultimately to Arizona, where the pioneering road ended and the road to the future began. William's link to the past connects us to the earliest documented progenitor of the Flake family, Samuel Flake, who created a thriving plantation next to Smith Creek near the present-day community of Lylesville, North Carolina. William's story connects us to the founding of a new church, claiming a living prophet and a pioneer spirit that moved thousands across territorial lands in search of freedom and peace from oppression. William set standards that have endured for over 140 years, and one family trait has stood out above all others. When the Flakes acquired goods, they gave them away. It seems they considered their possessions to always be available to another in need, always and without hesitation. William's link to the present connects tens of thousands of descendants to that pioneering spirit that tamed a new land many times over, and to whom thousands more can link their survival as they became recipients of the often life-saving Flake generosity. His link to our future is yet unclaimed, and the question bears asking: what will we do with his legacy? Has that valiant spirit that tamed wild lands disappeared? Is the creed of generosity still active? Do we take up the torch and run the same race by forging success in our areas of wilderness? Or did William's work to build a legacy do nothing more than give us a family tree on which to look back? For some, the pioneer road ended when the destination was reached. Homes would be built, farms established, and towns would grow upon that hard-won ground. For others, however, it seemed pioneering was not to be satisfied with one expedition. So as homes were built and farms established, the settlers, by circumstance or choice, were moved upon to leave yet again into more unknown territory. Such was the path of William Jordan Flake. Born in 1839, William was 3 years old when his father, James Madison Flake, left behind the family plantation in North Carolina. It had been in this family since deeded to his grandfather, Samuel, by the British Crown in 1771. The family had remained since the American Revolution. James had everything he could want for his family, but he felt the call of the West. So taking only what he needed, moved his family to Kemper County, Mississippi. Land was plentiful, and he built a fine home. The plantation prospered as the family expanded, and he literally wanted for nothing. Then, in the winter of 1843, a stranger passed through the area, and since the Flakes refused no one, he stayed on for a bit, enjoying the Flake hospitality. He brought with him another kind of revolution, one that would change the lives and trajectory of the Flake family forever. His name was Elder Clapp, elder being an office appointed to him by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He taught that a living prophet had restored the true Church of Jesus Christ. And though at first the Flakes listened reluctantly, they ultimately embraced the message of the restored gospel. Persecution was intense, with friends, neighbors, and even family turning against them. They left their fine home once again, and seeking safety and peace, headed out to Nauvoo, Illinois, to be with the body of the new church.
James then proceeded to sell out, liquidated his holdings there, and with a couple of wagon loads of goods and mules and other household possessions, made their way to Nauvoo, where they were able to purchase or obtain the lot located immediately east of the Nauvoo temple, and there built a substantial brick home.
The record is unclear on the status of his slaves. Family lore suggests he freed them before moving to Nauvoo. Other stories indicate there were some that wanted to remain with the family, but later returned to Mississippi, not wanting to go west. But were they free? We just don't know. What we do know is that 2 of his slaves, a part of the family since birth, chose to stay with the family, baptized as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Flake and Lizzie remained with the family as slaves until being granted their freedom years later after settling in Salt Lake City and San Bernardino, respectively. Each of them went on to create their own legacies, but that's another story. William was just 5 years old when the family arrived in Nauvoo the summer of 1844, just weeks after the murder of Joseph Smith, the founder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Their time there would be short-lived, as mobs threatened and the members of the fledgling church had to flee yet again.
When it came time to leave for the West, the family made their way to winter quarters. And by this time, James was no longer the wealthy plantation holder that he had been in Mississippi. Much of his wealth had been used in helping to build the Nauvoo temple and in helping to outfit pioneers in their preparations to cross the plains.
Sending Green ahead to assist the Saints, the family remained a full winter at winter quarters. But the time there was hard on the family.
They lost 3 of their children in winter quarters, and they are buried in the graveyard located next to the winter quarters temple.
With loss weighing firmly on the transient family, they finally arrived at their destination, the Salt Lake Valley in Utah, in October of 1848. Once again, James set out to build a home for his family. Young William, now at the age of 10, watched and participated, learning a lot about setting up and establishing a home from his father. Valuable lessons, as we'll see. Taking on the tasks of an adult, he learned to ride, and ride well. He was a quick study when it came to horses and stock. As the home and farm took shape, James was called upon by the prophet Brigham Young on a mission to go west to California. Always one to serve, he left his home, his farm, his wife Agnes, and his 3 children.
And he joined a party of some 13 missionaries, as I remember that number, under the direction of Amasa Lyman, to go to California on a dual mission. They were to obtain gold to help the church with its finances, but they were also going to scout for locations for settlements, for colonization.
The journey was long and took the company across the Utah desert, through Death Valley, and into the San Joaquin Valley as they headed to Northern California.
One morning, a member of the party came to James and said, "I'm riding an animal that's a little bit frisky and my cinch is very weak. Would you be willing to trade cinches?" And And James said, sure, my white mules are tame, no problem. So they traded cinches and prepared to leave camp. As James, riding one mule, crossed the picket line, something startled the other mule, and it gave a jerk, which jerked the picket line up into the flank of that white mule that James was on, making it jump, breaking the cinch and dumping rider and saddle.
The fall broke his neck, and he died there by the side of the trail. This great man, colonizer, generous to all, was buried by the side of the trail in the San Joaquin Valley. He left behind his wife Agnes and his 3 children, among them 11-year-old William. Already having taken on the role of the man of the family, William really had to step up now.
Agnes was pretty much alone in her grief. After finding out that her husband was killed 3 months previous, she was already in poor health. They started out with 6 children, and she was left alone with having lost her husband and 3 of her children.
This was a time of colonization for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And once again, the prophet had a call.
The prophet called for those to head to California again to look for ways to help the saints come that were coming from Europe. And she had a choice to either stay in Utah and go it alone with her children or make the trip. And she decided she wanted to make the trip with her friends. Making that trip was a reminder to William of the trip he had made from Nauvoo. And he was mature for his years, and he was a big help to her.
437 Latter-day Saints made the journey from the Salt Lake Valley through the desert to California. It was difficult, but Agnes saw it through. Accompanied by her 2 young sons, William and Charles, her young daughter Sarah, and the ever-loyal Liz, they made their way fighting hunger, thirst, injury, and weather. On arrival, the company camped, and a few weeks later, Elder Amasa Lyman purchased the San Bernardino land grant from the Lugo family for $77,000. It was there they settled a new land once again.
On arriving in California, they established a community in San Bernardino, and Agnes, in preparing a home for her family, made a stockade house, which is done by planting posts in the ground in a circle with a doorway and roofing it with branches and twigs and whatever you can find. And that was a terrible winter for them. Wind blew, brought sand right through the middle of the house. It was a really trying situation. From that, she hired some Mexican help and built an adobe home in San Bernardino, in which she lived.
Even though this latest expedition to colonize on behalf of the church was successful, it would claim another parent, as Agnes, weak and very ill with tuberculosis, succumbed to her illness in 1855. Having lost both parents, William at 16 and the young Charles and Sarah, were taken in by Amasa Lyman, where they enjoyed all the privileges as members of the family. William grew in stature and learned how to farm, to care for stock, and how to run freight. In spite of his losses, he remained faithful to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and maintained his allegiance. 2 years later, another call from Brigham Young. Word came that Johnston's army was on the march to the Salt Lake Valley with orders to destroy the Mormons. William, now 18 and more man than boy, heeded the call, and with a company that included Amasa Lyman and Samuel White, William and Charles left San Bernardino and headed north to support the prophet. As it turned out, the threat was hollow. But as a result of spending time on the trail, William made quite an impression. Having been refined by hardship and tried by loss, he impressed Samuel, who spoke to his daughter Lucy about this remarkable young man that he'd traveled with for so long on the trail.
Samuel got very well acquainted with William and was impressed with the kind of young man he was. And when he got back to Beaver, told his daughter Lucy about the young man he had met and was so very impressed with.
William was clean of speech and demeanor, but not afraid of anything. He practiced his religion and was faithful, and was respectful of others.
Father and Uncle Joel had been to California to help bring back some families from San Bernardino. When they returned, they told me of a very fine young man whom they had met. He was strong, manly, and had no bad habits. According to them, he was a paragon of goodness. Lucy White Flake.
When they finally met, their feelings for each other were immediate and obvious to all. They were married December 30th, 1858. Moving his bride to a new settlement called Beaver City in southern Utah, William did what he'd seen his father do and began to build a home on 2 city lots. They were poor, but happy, and made do with what they had, a necessity since the nearest store was 200 miles away. William worked many jobs. He had stock in companies, raised barley, chased outlaws as a Minuteman, was in the Black Hawk War, broke horses for $5 each, and drove teams as he moved freight between settlements in the area. As he worked hard to earn a living, all his spare time went into developing the farm and their home in town. These were difficult, yet idyllic times for the Flakes. Their home and farm grew. They started a family. William and Lucy were called upon to live the law of plural marriage. After much deliberation and tears, they took a second wife, Prudence J. Karchner, in 1868, and together they created a harmonious family. William's reputation as a fair and generous man had earned him great respect in the community. They finally had everything they wanted and had worked so hard to achieve. Life was good, but a new path was looming, and life for the Flakes would change yet again. William had gone to a general conference of the church in the spring of 1877. It was a grand occasion because a temple was now in their midst, so the conference would be held in St. George, Utah. William went with Prudence and left Lucy at home to tend their youngest son, George, who was seriously ill. Lucy looked forward to their return with great anticipation and wrote about that homecoming.
I was so relieved when they drove up, but it only took me one look at my husband to see that something terrible had happened. I asked William, "What is the matter? You act so strange." Then that strong man who had passed through all the sorrows that could come to a man except sin and disgrace took me in his arms and with tears streaming unheeded from his eyes said, "Lucy, we must leave this beautiful home forever." He could say no more. Lucy White Flake.
I hereby issue a call to William Jordan Flake to go and settle in Arizona.
The call to colonize Arizona had come from the prophet Brigham Young directly to William. William had thought to go create a settlement, help the people adjust, then return to his beloved homestead. But he was told by the prophet, leave nothing to return to.
When they called him out of Utah, he was pretty well fixed in southern Utah. He'd been there for 20 years and pretty well established there. Well thought of, had a good farm, and the church asked him to sell what he had there and to come to Arizona and colonize. And he did.
Lucy feared the unknown. She feared the reputation of the Apaches. They ached together over leaving all they had worked so hard to achieve. How could they leave it all behind and start over yet again? However, they each carried a conviction, born of hardship and revelation, that they were engaged in the work of the Lord, and unless willing to give up their God, they would go.
If we were needed to build up the waste places, we would go, even to the last frontier. But I still contend that it took more faith and courage than the trip across the plains, or the fortitude displayed by any of my long line of royal pioneer ancestors. Now it seemed we were taking our lives in our hands as we went forth again from civilization. Lucy White Flake.
On the morning of November 19th, 1877, with shouts and calls to the oxen and horses, the cracking of whips and the well wishes from family and friends, the company began what would become a 2-month trek into Arizona. There were 6 wagons, 9 yoke of oxen, 7 span of horses, 200 head of cattle, and 40 loose horses. Besides the family were an additional 5 hired men.
I don't think we can even know what it was like to move in wagons with teams and move that far, and with no roads, trails, but no roads, and a canyon between you. Having to ferry across Lee's Ferry, when the river was a wild river at that time. I mean, there was no dams to hold it up, and they would cross those cattle on a ferry and teams on a ferry.
It's difficult to convey the level of hardship faced by every member of the company. The journey was long and tedious. Sometimes only a mile could be traversed in a day. Think about that. A whole day to move 5,000 feet. In spite of the sorrow of leaving 20 years of hard work behind, and the sheer hardship of the journey, anyone they met on the road that needed assistance received it, no matter what it was. A horse, an ox, food, wagon repairs, even preparing the dead for burial. No one was passed up. The early winter cold was relentless, and there was nowhere to go for relief. Imagine the slow passing of time with a raging storm all around, as you sit with no amusements or distractions, just the sound of the wind and the ever-present cold.
I walk outside taking my garbage in the cold, and I think, I don't know why, but I think of the pioneers when I'm doing that, and I think, how did they sleep in a freezing cold tent? They were wet and they went to bed in a cold tent. How did they not give up and say, I give up, I'm going back, I can't take it anymore? And it's because they had a testimony of the Book of Mormon. Their testimony brought them through. It was their testimony of the Book of Mormon. And I know that that is the secret to the things that we go through in our life and time now. And I think if they looked at the things that we're enduring, they would think, I'm glad I went through what I went through. I don't know that I could stand the trials of this day and time. But that's where we receive our strength too, is the same way they received their strength.
These people were 100 miles from anything you could call civilization. 100 miles today is less than 2 hours by car. and the only provisions required are a small bottle of water and a candy bar.
Some people say, oh, that trip to Utah from Flagstaff to Page is just boring, and it's not boring to me. As I go up through there, I look at it and I think, I wonder where they camp. I wonder if they found water here. I see some poplar trees or some cottonwood or something. I think there's got to be water there, a little seep. They must have been able to camp here and maybe had a little bit of water.
This is not a move like we think of a move today. There was no final destination. William was taking his family into new, unknown country where there was no support. Everything he needed, he had to bring. Teams, wagons, furniture, farming implements, tools, livestock, and provisions for at least a year. He didn't know if he'd ever prosper again, but he went anyway. He couldn't see the end from the beginning, but he knew the Lord could, and he trusted that.
Coming to Arizona was a tough thing. There was quite a barrier of the Colorado River to cross to get here, and the tribe of Indians that weren't always friendly, the Navajos that I lived among, to pass through to get into Arizona, and then it was just like another world.
After 2 months on the trail, on January 15, 1878, they reached the first settlement called Ballinger's Camp, located on the Little Colorado. It was part of a series of attempted settlements, most of which failed and are no longer there. They only stayed a few days, then moved upriver 20 miles to another settlement now called Joseph City. As was typical of the day, most of the camps and new settlements were living the United Order, where they held all possessions in common. It made sense at the time that scarce resources would be pooled and used as needed for the group. William was appointed to take charge of the stock, an assignment in which he excelled. His duties kept him riding most of the time. When they first stopped at this location, it looked like it would be an easy matter to dam off the sluggish, muddy, slow-moving stream. But the first dam of brush rocks and clay was hardly finished when a flood came down and washed it out. They rebuilt it. It was washed out again. Each month for 5 months, it washed out. The water was so full of mud they could do nothing to clear it out, and even after a bath, they felt dirtier than before. Their clothes became red and murky.
And Flake said there's got to be something better than this.
It was the ox incident that set him on a search for a better place. Lucy writes in her journal about a poor family who was passing through. One of their oxen died and they had only one left, and it was too old to pull their load. William traded the man's 4-year-old stag for a fine 2-year-old heifer. Grateful, the man went on his way. But William had not consulted the board and was called to task for the trade.
He was told he was now in a company and was not at liberty to dispose of property without consent. Then, said William, I am in the wrong place. My motto has always been to help those who need help. My mission out here was to build up the country, and I'm going to find a new home where I can be free. Lucy White Flake.
Grandpa just said these people needed that, and if I can't help, I don't need to be here. I can go where I can. And I think that was a lot to do with him deciding to try to find a place where he could do his thing.
Lucy gloried in his spunk and told him to go, and she was good with whatever he did. The next morning, he saddled up, tied some food on the back of his saddle, and went in search of a new home with his close friend, A.Z. Palmer. This was the middle of June, 1878. The pair were gone 3 weeks, and while away, William's little son, George, after battling a long illness, got worse, finally passing away on the day of William's return. William built a crude coffin, and they laid their precious boy to rest, wetting the mound with their tears.
Our family sat down together, and I asked William, what of the future? With his arms about Prudence and me, he told us how he first went to Savoia, New Mexico, then to St. John's, up to Fort Apache, an army post among the Indians, returning by the Corduroy and Silver Creek. On all his trip, he had seen but one suitable place, and that was a ranch on Silver Creek owned by Mr. James Stinson. Lucy White Flake.
Stinson had set up a jewel of a ranch and had run it successfully for 3 years. He had several hundred acres under cultivation by the side of the clear-running Silver Creek. William sat down to deal with him, and Flake had something Stinson wanted: Utah-grade cattle.
William J. was pretty ingenious in the way he was able to acquire things. He always found a way, without a lot of resource, to be able to make things happen. People would trust him. A lot of people came to him and asked him to make transactions for them because they knew that he was I'm going to use the word diplomat.
William knew he had something of value, and the agreement was made to trade the ranch for 650 head of the envy of every cattleman throughout the Southwest, Utah-grade cattle. Stinson had another ranch, and he knew he could make better profits with his current contracts if he had better stock.
So he made that deal, and Flake moved his family and a few other families, and after they were established and the church leaders came down and they assessed the situation that the little Colorado settlements, there were 4 of them, and they were not succeeding, wasn't a healthy place to live. And in time, the little Colorado settlements disappeared, and the only one left to this day is Joseph City. So anyway, the railroad came through just a few years afterward, and Snowflake became a viable stopping point.
Lucy wept when she saw the valley from the top of the hill. They bathed their faces and drank the first clear water they'd seen in months.
As I kneeled there, my soul was filled with gratitude that our lot was to be cast in such pleasant places. It seemed this beautiful valley was a bit of heaven reserved for us as a reward for all we had suffered. Tears of joy filled my eyes as I poured out my gratitude in my first prayer. In the valley of the Rio de la Plata. Lucy White Flake.
That is the story of how William Flake came to settle the town of what would become Snowflake. William was the pride of his family. At the age of 39, he had accomplished much and was respected by all with whom he associated. His generosity, courage, fairness, honesty, and good judgment were proverbial. William was a pioneer. He was a man of God. He was talented and kind. He built a town in the wilderness and was a shrewd and knowledgeable negotiator. He gave of his substance to the point of almost giving it all away. And that quality began with his father and continued with his children. If anyone was passed the torch from William Jordan Flake, it would be to his firstborn, James Madison Flake. James, named for his grandfather, held his father in high regard. And though he was young and newly married, when the call to settle Arizona came, he had no doubts what he'd do.
He said, if my father has a call to Arizona, he said, if he's going, I'm going.
Intending to return, he left his life in Beaver behind, and with a new bride and what possessions he could bring, went south. He worked hand in hand with his father, William, and some would say shaped his character to match his father's.
They did make the trip, and when James saw the difficulty of making a livelihood here in this harsh environment, he determined to stay rather than to return back to Beaver. That decision by James to stay by his father and help him is a Flake family tradition, and it has passed on from generation to generation.
James was every bit the cowboy his father was, and had his share of adventures. Along with his brother Charles, with whom he was very close, they created a new life for themselves and their families as the little town prospered. Together, they started a general store and freight business, which brought needed goods to the town. Charles, however, was to meet an untimely end, when as the town marshal, he and James attempted to arrest a bank robber. In the ensuing scuffle, the robber shot Charles. Within a few hours, Charles died, leaving a family which James felt an obligation to assist for the remainder of his life. The incident robbed him of part of his hearing and some eyesight, but he carried on.
Grandpa Flake was just always generous to everybody and anybody. It was just a part of his life, and I remember a lot of time in the community, people coming to him for help, and he was willing to give it. It was a part of his life and became a part of our life, I hope.
James created some traditions that were carried on for decades, and some even today. The things his grandchildren remember about him are also telling.
Grandpa Flake represented something very, very special to the grandchildren. I always remember him sitting on the porch, especially in any weather that was decent, and having his kids come and sit on his lap and talk to him, or having chairs pulled up to sit around him. Even though he couldn't always see a lot of us, he always made us feel like we were loved and enjoyed, and I felt like a part of his life so strongly. I can still see him in the evenings, even as a little child, going to climb the stairs very carefully to go to his room, to have his prayer and climb into bed. I can still see him at the table with his meals, but mostly I saw him in a chair, sitting by his radio.
The World Today.
That he could turn on and listen to the news.
With summaries of the latest world news presented over these.
My memories of my grandfather are very sacred and very dear.
James established and carried out traditions, held to his faith in Jesus Christ, and even as he aged and became infirm, was always generous. He came to represent a heritage that would be remembered and handed down to future generations, inside and outside the Flake family.
This heritage ties in very closely with my personal testimony. Equal with that was the gratitude that I have always had for the Flake name, knowing from my youth the stories of the family, the things that they endured. They're willing to sacrifice, to me, was always a point of great pride and appreciation, knowing that that ancestry had provided the blessings that I have come to enjoy, and that there's a deep debt of gratitude and appreciation that I enjoy to them.
While this account deals mainly with the Flake family, the legacy of Snowflake isn't so much that of a single pioneer as much as it is that of the hard work of men and women that held to the standard he represented, a standard of faith and devotion, of working through hardship, of giving to those in need in the moment of their need, with no thought to hold back for themselves. There are likely entire family lines alive today because their ancestors were succored by William Flake and others of his breed. Their stalwart lives have been a hallmark of graciousness, compassion, empathy, and willingness to do for others. It's impossible to name them all. But without the contributions of the Bairds, Turleys, Mills, Webbs, Karchners, Solomons, and all of the early settlers, the establishment of the Snowflake community would not have been possible. Those of us born into an established city or town can't know the process of raising a town from scratch. Everything townspeople rely on, roads, drainage, postal service, the court system, local laws, services like repairs, carpentry, education, everything had to be created. Just the basic supplies like cloth for clothing required a trip to Salt Lake City until stores could be established. As the population grew and new people arrived in town, they brought with them new capabilities and new services emerged. Ranching and farming were the mainstays, but children needed an education and doctors. Wagons needed repair. Homes had to be built. And with each need, a new business would spring up to supply it. The Butterfield stage line made mail delivery possible. The railroad gave access to goods and supplies. And little by little, the town grew.
The appearance of the town is different. For instance, we have curbs and gutters through the town now. There's a lot more homes that are built where there used to be garden spots and things like that.
Combined with the generosity begun by William, a community with heart began to spring up. A community that valued education, hard work, devotion to God, and service to others.
Snowflake has always had a strong musical program here. It's been kind of the hub of education. It was the hub of church activity. It was also a community that abounded in culture.
It would appear on this journey to find Snowflake that we also have to look beyond the history, past the farmland and the houses, and even beyond the infrastructure. Those are the outward parts of Snowflake, the parts we can see. There is another side of every community, beyond the visible. You might call it the heart and soul of the town. In our journey to find the legacy of Snowflake, 4 elements emerge. Across the community, from family to family, there were and still are heartaches, serious challenges, illness, death, and difficulty. But what we found in talking to the people that live here, there are 4 qualities originating from the founding families that are responsible for the ultimate success of the town. These are the 4 qualities that get them through the hard parts and remain today as a focal point of the legacy and heritage of Snowflake, Arizona. They sound off like the creed of a community club. They are faith, acceptance, work ethic, and service. The founding pioneers were driven by faith. Faith in the God they served. Faith in the leaders of the fledgling Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And faith in their abilities to achieve what was asked of them. They didn't expect wealth or fame. They were humble people. And when that humility combined with their faith, they had the strength to go where they were called. Strength to obey a command that for most people would have been an imposition. But the faith they had in God and in their leaders made action possible.
They were obedient and dedicated and had deep testimonies. They were just good people. They weren't perfect. Of course, they weren't perfect. I I do feel like Snowflake is sacred ground. It just has a special feeling to it. And I think that's because of the sacrifice that our ancestors made to give everything up, and they were willing to do that for a greater cause.
A lot was asked of these people: to leave family members, leave new homesteads, and to move again, not knowing really where they were headed. That was a lot to ask. It was a display of faith to even consider it.
When I think about Lucy Hannah and what she had to give up of leaving everything behind and putting her faith in our Heavenly Father, she was strong, super strong, and she could handle anything that's thrown at her if she was able to do what she did of packing up and just coming, knowing you have to have a lot of faith, and faith in our Heavenly Father of knowing, okay, this is what we're supposed to do. It's gonna work out. No matter what we do, it will work out. So I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for her courage, and lets me see that and to know, okay, things are doable. We can handle it. Whatever's thrown at us, we'll be okay.
The founders of Snowflake accepted what was asked. And while there was likely murmuring and complaint along the way, they accepted the hardships. They also accepted all newcomers, those that were led here, chose to be here, or just stumbled in. They were accepted and made part of the community.
There's the same camaraderie with the old families that were here, but many of the new people that have come in since the early ones, they're wonderful people. They've helped us in many ways. Without them, we would not have many of the things that we have.
Like the fabric of America, Snowflake is made up of diverse people of many backgrounds and cultures, each one adding to the personality and success of Snowflake. One such personality is Eva Juarez. Coming from Mexico as a child with her parents to work seasonally for a rancher, she returned each year, finally marrying and returning permanently to raise her family. Her restaurant, La Cocina de Eva, is a fixture in Snowflake.
In 1976, my father brought us, the whole family. We came to work for a man named Lloyd Marno, amazing man. My dad was a farmer, so they work over there, my brothers and all of us, we were there. My dad used to bring us back and forth to Mexico. And finally, when I was 17 years old, I came back to Snowflake. So I started cleaning houses. I lived with American people. I went to Prescott and I met this elderly lady which I was taking care. And then from there I met my husband. I got married and we came back to Snowflake to raise our children. When I came back to Snowflake again, it was amazing, just that warm feeling. I started working for Ed's Market, which is not longer there, but I started working in a deli department. And every Wednesday I would make Mexican food. And people will come and keep saying, you should open a restaurant. And we were like, no, it's a lot of work.
Finally, deciding to open a restaurant of her own, she borrowed money from her former boss and shared space at the Donut Hut to begin her restaurant career. It was so small, people had to wait outside just to get in.
We started very small, and people was so amazing reacting. I mean, we were so little. We probably had 7 tables, and people will wait in line to walk in. I keep praying, Lord, we please add to our little building or something. Help us to do something.
Driving down the street one day, she saw that a restaurant on Main Street had closed down and was able to get a great deal from Glenn Flake. He allowed her to lease until she could acquire the down payment to buy the property.
But the most amazing about this is our people around, how they support us.
Now, after nearly 20 years, third-generation family members are part of the crew.
If it wasn't for my family, their cooks, and my help around, I could not do it alone. When this pandemic happened, when these things happened, I realized how amazing this town was, because everybody, it was no one person that didn't support us. They were here for us. And you know what? I hope that I'm here for them too. And we just do our best. And we wanted to delight our customers. And sometimes my face is not very happy, but it's not because it's me. It's just things happen. I'm a human with the cheer of Christ. That's all I can say. And I hope that we keep doing our job one day at a time.
She did what all residents have done. She applied her faith to hard work and made something happen. There are many stories like Ava's. Stories of people that were drawn here, stopped, and ended up staying. Each one becoming a recipient of the legacy of acceptance.
When we moved to Snowflake, I was super excited that we had found a community with a nice park and all of that. But more importantly, we made some really excellent friends and people that were just super kind, and it was so nice to feel like we had found home.
The founders of Snowflake held to a work ethic that was and still is epic. Work comes first. Work guarantees survival. Work is what gets things done and makes us strong. No job was too hard, no task undoable. They jumped in with both feet time and again to gain ground in the battle to succeed.
See ya. Have a great day.
That work ethic trickles down into community pride, where things are taken care of and maintained, where time is devoted to keeping order and sustaining organization and beauty.
When you drive through the towns, you can see that people take pride in the community in our small, sweet town, that they take care of their streets, of their roads. We have our cute street lamps that line the roads, and it's very welcoming.
If anything could be considered the main endeavor in Snowflake, it would be ranching and farming.
Well, in the cattle business and farming, agriculture, there's always work. It's gone on for generations now. My boys are the 5th generation from William Jordan Flake. When I was younger, nearly everyone had a milk cow and a big garden, and most had a little farm along with other things that they did for a living. It produced good people. They had a desire to work, and they weren't afraid of working, and this is still going on.
I remember working as a little kid, going out, riding horses at the break of dawn, gathering cows and pushing them to the next pasture, or gathering them and then branding them. And I remember always, my grandpa always pushing me and my dad always pushing me to get things done and to stay on task.
It makes them responsible. If they have chores to do after school, if they have livestock to feed, or if they have horses that need to be ridden and things like that, it gives them a responsibility, and they learn to be responsible for their part of the operation.
I've got 4 boys, and I'm constantly reminding them of how lucky they are to live here, even though sometimes they might lack for entertainment or things to do here, that they truly are lucky and blessed to be able to live their formative years here in the community. And, you know, as part of that, I think that they have an obligation to carry that on and to do their part in maintaining that community atmosphere. And that's why this community is the way that it is because people have strived to pass those things on and taught their children to do the same things that they have done.
The ability to work through until a job was done is what got the town built. That same ability is what improved it and now keeps it and other parts of the world going.
Snowflake has produced hundreds of good people that have gone out and made their name in other places because of the things that they learned here when they were young. And when they went other places, they took the ethics that they learned when they were here, and they were good citizens wherever they went. They were hard workers, they were responsible, and they were able to make a good living doing lots of important things.
Service and her little sister generosity is the main legacy quality that came up most often during this project. When an accounting is called for by William to his descendants, that will likely be the one most examined. It seems to be the foundation and backbone of Snowflake. Service to all, giving, donating, and supplying goods, services, even livestock to anyone in need.
It's what you do, and you go and you take care of those around you and those that need help, and it does instill that sense of pride because it makes you feel good when you go do stuff like that and you take care of those that you love and those that you don't even know and you get to know. And through that, you're showing great examples, and it's making others want to join in and do the same to help out.
Thanksgiving to us was cutting up a beef and also having things from our garden to distribute, especially to the widows. Always the widows were cared for by our family. And it was something that I'm sure started with Grandpa Flake, but was very much a part of my own dad's family for many, many years, and I was always a part of it.
Another service tradition that came up often was the wood dance. The men would go out and spend the day cutting up wood, loading it into wagons. Then in later years, trucks. The wood would be distributed to those in need, especially the widows, and became their firewood supply for the winter. Then anyone that helped that day was entitled to attend the wood dance. It was a grand affair with food, music, and the shared joy of a job well done.
Well, I think that's the whole reason we're here, is just to help each other. And by helping each other, we help ourselves. And we may not be quite as generous as we could be or should be, or the old timers were. We tend to get a little more selfish as we go along, I think. I hope that we've been able to keep some of that together. We kind of feel like we need to help people out, it's just part of life.
Honor and allegiance to the faith they claimed in the Lord Jesus Christ. Acceptance of all that were led to this place. A work ethic that was beyond reproach. And service to any and all that had a need. In our search for the legacy of Snowflake, those emerge as the key qualities handed down by our forebears. Are we not, each of us, indebted to towns like Snowflake? Towns built by the stalwarts of the country that wouldn't quit no matter what. These towns remind us of who we used to be as a nation. They show us who we can be now Individuals and families that want to have a nice place to live, free of turmoil and conflict, to live our dreams in peace, to work out problems surrounded by family and friends, and maybe leave behind a legacy of service and generosity. Maybe we all need a little snowflake in our lives. So what do we find when we look at this town in the desert with the unlikely name? Snowflake was founded out of tragedy and hardship. There was great loss, loss through illness and death. There was great sacrifice, sacrifice of possessions, of expectations, of will. Was there despair? Was there complaint? Perhaps. But there was also faith and love and joy, and ultimately there was peace. All of that taken together is a legacy of Snowflake, that a family, a people, a community can face great loss, tragedy, and sacrifice much, and still find peace through faith and love. Centered in the midst of it all is the Savior of mankind, to whom we look for peace. In Snowflake, Arizona, that is what we find when we look deeply.
In the spring of '77, William got the call. Life was good in Beaver, but they had to leave it all. By the time they got to Rollin', a chill was in the air. When they stopped at Silver Creek, winter met 'em there. Hardships were a way of life for settlers back then. Their minds often drifted back to their old homeland. The cattle must have read their minds, 'cause each and every day the cowboys had to round up all the strays. 'Cause they were drifting back to Beaver, drifting back to Beaver, drifting back to Beaver all the time. Animals, like people, are naturally inclined to drift back to their homeland time to time. Many hours long and hard without the use of wire were put into that drift fence that ran for miles and miles. Cliffs and canyons helped a lot, brush thick and dense, all helped to make that cedar fence. 'Cause they were drifting back to Beaver, drifting back to Beaver, drifting back to Beaver all the time. Animals, like people, are naturally inclined to drift back to their homeland time to time. Lonely nights around the fire, William liked to dream of his life in Beaver, the one he had to leave. Animals, like people, are naturally inclined to drift back to their homeland time to time. 'Cause he was drifting back to Beaver, drifting back to Beaver, drifting back to Beaver in his mind. Animals, like people, are naturally inclined back to their homeland time to time.